Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast, listeners. I'm excited to be here with you again this week. And this week, talking about the Enneagram, which is not going to be a surprise to anybody who's in my life because I toyed around with my confession for today's episode being that I'm obsessed with the Enneagram. I don't really think I'm enlightening anybody. It's not a newsflash to know that, because if you are working with me right now, or if you live in my house, you know that I never shut up about the Enneagram. This summer, my daughter was like, Mom, is it possible for you to go an entire day without saying the word Enneagram? And I was like, I actually think that no, the answer is it's not possible. So that's my mini confession for you. But the other confession I want to make around the Enneagram is that it is so tempting for everybody, including me, to once you discover this thing and it is like mind blowing and eye opening and all of this stuff, it is almost irresistible to try to type the people around you, guess what types they are. I just was talking to a friend yesterday actually, who I had done a typing session with him over the summer, and it was like revolutionary for him. Like, he cried during our session. He literally looked at me and he was like, you know me, and with kind of like the face and energy of someone who's like never truly been seen before. And that is sometimes for people how it feels to discover your Enneatype and um learn more about yourself and feel like, oh my gosh, this is my place in the world. Like, you know. And when I was talking to him yesterday, I was like, how has it gone since we did that typing session? Like, how, has it been interesting to you? Have you kept reading? And he was like, oh, yeah, I know all the types now, and I know what everybody else's type is. And I can tell just what their type is, and I'm working on reducing the entire typing thing into like 5 to 10 questions so that I can really quickly assess the type of everybody and all this stuff. And I just kind of chuckled to myself. That's his journey and everything, so I wasn't about to intervene and steer him in a different direction. But I also chuckled because I get it. Like, I feel like so many of us feel that excitement and like, revelation when we discover the Enneagram. And then a lot of us go into that mode of like, I'm going to put everybody in a box and I know exactly who they are. And then I'm going to know exactly how to relate to them and deal with them and all of that stuff. Sorry for my weird audio there for a second. I had to sneeze. So I had to like pause the recording, sneeze, come back to the recording. There you go. A little peek behind the curtain for you. So my confession truly this week is not just that I'm obsessed with the Enneagram, but that I fall prey to that delicious desire around my kids, especially all the time. And I always have. When they were way, way, way too young to know what their types were or anything. I was just dying of curiosity. I wanted to know what type they were. And then once they started showing any sort of signs of being this or that type, I would immediately be like, okay, so you're a 3 or you're a whatever. And, really kind of pigeonholing them. And that's what I want to talk about today is what is the typical way that people try to use the Enneagram with their kids in parenting? And instead, like, what is a healthy way for us to actually use the Enneagram in parenting? Because it actually is incredibly useful, but it can also be a pretty um, sort of limiting and boxing tool if we aren't careful. So So let's kind of talk about kids in the Enneagram period. You know, or even let's take a step even a little bit behind that and talk about the Enneagram in general. Like I've been racking my brain the last couple of years even just to come up with like what is a good word when people say like, "Oh, the Enneagram, I've never heard of that before. What is it?" What I usually tell people is like it's a personality test, but times a million, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But most people know about it as a personality test, but that really doesn't do it justice, and it um I think almost is insulting to the Enneagram because figuring out what your type is and then starting to pursue your work through the Enneagram is not the same as taking like an online test and finding out that like I'm a Monica and you're a Rachel or something like that. It is not some as simple as that. And I would say it's not even as simple as like the Myers-Briggs test and understanding that you're like an ENFP or something like that. It's so much deeper than that. And so I've always felt like calling it a personality test was like so reductive. So recently I've started thinking about the Enneagram as like a map of the universe that kind of outlines these like 9 facets to reality or energy or the universe or whatever you want to call it. And your type is kind of like where you're from. Like it's the place on the map that's like your origin. Um so I don't know if that makes it even less understandable, but it really feels like a more accurate description of the Enneagram. And your like type, whatever type you are, that type was kind of what you were destined to be when you came Earthside. Just like you don't get to pick where you're born. I'm from Granville, Ohio. That's just where I'm from. And no matter where I go and what I do for the rest of my life, I will always have been originated in Granville, Ohio. And there's nothing anybody can do like my childhood, my experiences, my upbringing, my learning. Nothing can change the fact that that's where I'm from. That's kind of what your type is. And as we grow, um, well, first, what happens as we grow is we really just sort of create and calcify a personality and like almost like an egoic version of ourselves around that Enneatype type. And then if we keep growing and maturing and doing our work and considering all this stuff and confronting our stuff, we start to deconstruct that egoic version of ourselves and that rigid personality structure and soften into what I would consider more like our authentic selves or our authentic self in that type. So, so now let's look at children. Kids, because they're from where they're from, right? Like they have a type the day they're born. We just don't know what that type is and they don't know what it is and it's like waiting for them. Um but also because kids don't have a rigid personality structure, they haven't created a strong like calcified ego yet. Kids are not um it's like they can move around the map a little bit better. They'll still always be from wherever they're from, but they have just a lot more mobility and fluidity, and they can really connect with all these different facets of the universe, even though one of those facets is going to end up being their sort of origin place and their kind of destination where they return to as their personality develops. And by the way, all humans can access all those 9 facets, even when we're older. Like I am an Enneagram type 1, but I absolutely, when I'm doing my work and I'm in my authentic self and I'm really, connected with, things beyond my personality and beyond my ego, I can be in all of those 9 facets. And there are some students of the Enneagram that really say that like when you are fully integrated and self-actualized, you are no type because you're all types. You cease to, align solely with one facet or something like that. So this ability that kids have of kind of moving around the map and being more fluid and mobile, that that is accessible to us, but it requires us to really grow and evolve. Um, So when we're looking at our children and how they're behaving in the world, especially before the age, I mean, the very earliest, I would say before the age of 9, there's absolutely no, um, I would say, confidence or guarantee that whatever you think that your kid is, they are that type. It's really how they're presenting today or even this year. But, to be able to say with any sort of confidence that they are whatever type, that would be pretty hard. And I would say that's still true even into early adolescence. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the Enneagram anyway. So when I'm talking about kids and their behavior and working with my clients on like how to respond to their behavior or how their child is presenting, I don't say, oh, your child is presenting as an Enneagram type 4 or your child is an 8. What I'll say is, it seems like right now in your child's life, they are really in their 4 or they are in their 8. They are hanging out in that geography. And that doesn't mean that that's where they're from. It just means that's where they're visiting. So, so then we can actually make sure to kind of keep our minds open and fluid about who our child is going to become or how their true inner workings function. All of those things we don't need to know. And there is a little bit of an acceptance and non-attachment that we need to bring into parenting always around any topic, and especially around the topic of the Enneagram. If you can't, I encourage you to be really honest with yourself. And if you really can't, release your attachment to the story that your brain might tell about your kid, if by using this, this roadmap of the Enneagram, then don't use the Enneagram in your parenting because it is really, not helpful to our kids for us to be, you know, pigeonholing them and defining them instead of them defining themselves as they, mature and things like that. But if you can maintain that non-attachment and be much more like fluid and open and curious and just responding to this current present moment, awesome. Let's use it. Let's look at that. And so I want to give you a few examples of what it looks like kind of like all around the Enneagram. What does a kid who's in their 1, in their 2, blah, blah, blah look like? And this is very general. It's not going to be, you know, 100% this way, and there are other traits of the type that might show up instead of the one that I'm going to talk about, but just to kind of like run through it a little bit, let's give this a try here. Okay, so I'm just going to start with type 1 and go down the numbers. There might be some Enneagram purists who say you should start with the 8. Some people say you should start with the 9 for different reasons, but we're going to start with the 1. So when our kids are in their 1 of the things we might observe is them kind of beating themselves up, holding them to an unattainable, holding themselves to an unattainable standard, and then getting really down on themselves when they fall short. Lots of self-criticism and things like that. So that would be like a kiddo who's in their 1. A kiddo who's in there 2 is coming across as like super empathetic because they can really notice the emotions of other people, and then they feel responsible for the emotions of other people, and they're trying to fix everybody's problems or cheer them up or make them, you know um be very helpful to them and all of those things. And you can almost tell there's like a little bit of a solicitousness about it, like, I'm going to be really helpful for you, and then you're going to feel really loving towards me. And I'm also going to be super aware of when you're not happy with me or when somebody is not happy, and I am going to try to make them happy and make them like me by being helpful. That's a 2 kind of pattern. A kiddo who's in their 3 can sometimes appear kind of like a little bit of a mean kid because they are in this like achievement mode where it's about the ends justify the means. I'll give you a great example of this one. My husband, who is not a 3 at all, he is actually a 2. when he was a little boy, he and his mom decided to have like a little foot race, and Mike wanted to win the race. And so he tripped his mom, and she got really hurt. And of course, he was mortified and all of those things. But like, that's a really great example of how Mike was in his three, even if it was just for that split minute where he's like, I want to win. And I don't care what I have to do to get there. I'm going to win. And then that is a very three-ish thing to do. And there are lots of kids who will do that. You'll see kids who want to be first in line, so they just push people out of the way. Or, they want to get lots of presents, so they invite people they don't like to their birthday party. Or, they have their eyes on the prize, and they're not looking at, you know, how they're showing up in the world. That's a three-ish kind of thing to do. I would say, oh, your kiddo's in your three, or in their three right now. The four is going to show up as kind of moody. I would like to say sometimes fours can find the cloud in any rainbow. So they really attach themselves to a really sad sob story, particularly about themselves. The teacher hates me, I have no friends, etc., etc. Um, so that's a four. A five is what I wrote down in my notes for today. I wrote down for the five, brainiac isolation booth. When you see kids who are like obsessively like cataloging dinosaurs, or, collecting, Legos, or, oh my gosh, that person who's like, actually, this is what's really true, and that kind of thing, that kind of like, there's a little bit of a nerd alert sort of vibe to it, but it's mostly about like collecting information, synthesizing information, becoming an expert in something. That's a five. Six energy is going to look like being anxious sometimes, having a really hard time deciding. So I'll give you an example of my son, who actually is a six. So he wasn't just in his six at that time. Like as time went on, it became more and more apparent he actually is a six. But one of his childhood behaviors would be, when I was always trying to like come up with stuff for us to do on, in the summer, by the end of the summer, I'm like running out of ideas. But one of the things I would do, and you're feel free to steal this hack, I would take the kids to the dollar store and give them like $2 or $3. Oh my gosh. My older two kids were in heaven. River, my six, I had taken him to a torture chamber. Like he only had $2 or $3, and he had to make a decision, and he couldn't decide. And he became so anxious and stressed out about what would be the right thing to choose. We would all be ready and having checked out, and he hadn't even picked something yet. And then once he did pick it, we'd be back in the car, and he'd just be like, do you think I picked the right thing? Should I have gotten that other thing? Just that sense of like, what if, what if, what if, what if, lots of contingency planning, lots of anxiety and worry and concern about, making not necessarily the right choice, but the safe choice. And so that's a sixy energy. Seven energy is going to be just fun, 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 and very avoidant. So lots of kids are in their sevens a lot of time. They're just goofing around, having fun. They're just really connected with the joy and joie de vivre and that like childlike playfulness. That's seven energy. And they don't really want to deal with stuff that's going to bring them down. So they might purposely distract themselves. Like, have you ever had a hard conversation with one of your little kids? And maybe it's not even a hard conversation because they've been naughty or they're in trouble or something like that. It could be a hard conversation because it's like breaking their brain a little bit, like when you have a conversation with your kid about like sex, and you could just see the wheels turning. And at some point during that conversation, they might just be like, can we go play Legos now? Or, can I have a quesadilla? They change the subject to something that's light and fun and at their pay grade and is where they want their brain to be at. That is seven behavior. And thank goodness, right? Thank goodness that kids have access to all of these things, because everything I'm describing here is stuff that serves a purpose. We all need to be in touch with this. And as I'm describing all these things, I bet you can identify for yourself. Like, even if you already know what your Enneagram type is, you probably also can recognize, like, oh, yeah, I know I do that sometimes. Like, sometimes I connect with that kind of energy for sure. Eight energy is going to be the bossy pants, but not necessarily goody two shoes, if that makes sense. They really just like to be in power, and they really do not like to be overpowered. So when you see a kid who's like, I'm going to do it myself, I do it, no help, all that kind of stuff, very eight energy. And the other thing about the eight energy that you'll see, especially with teenagers, is denial. So eights have a really amazing ability to look at a situation and make it so in their minds that they are blameless and everyone else around them is really like falling short. And nobody can do that better than a teenager. So you might notice some eight energy in your teenager. And then the nine energy is the energy about like just going along with the group, not making waves, being compliant, and just trying to keep the peace all the time. And we all know kids who do that, or all of our kids have done that to some point. I'm sure we all have done that at some point. So those are kind of like the nine sort of like examples of like a kiddo who might be in each of those sort of like energy states or places on the map, so to speak. And then we can talk about like, well, what do we do about that? Right? It doesn't matter if your child is a one. If your child is beating themselves up and holding themselves to unattainable standards and making all of these like rigid rules for themselves, it doesn't matter if that kiddo is actually a one, which we'll discover 10 years from now, or if they just are in their one right now. What's going to be helpful for a one is going to be helpful for this kid in this moment. And so you can start to talk to them about, is there even an example of a rule that's never needs to be broken, or a rule that there's no exceptions to that rule? And what might it look like if you just allowed yourself to be imperfect? And these are all going to be really hard things for this person to look at if they're in this energetic state, but looking at those things is how a one can soften around those things. And so responding to your child in the way that they're presenting themselves to you is going to be really useful. Even if it's not going to fix it, it's not going to make it go away. You might be talking to a 4-year-old, so the concepts that you're talking about might be needed to be like really presented at their age level so they can be understood and stuff like that. But just even demonstrating to that kiddo like imperfection is not a big deal. I'm a mess, like I myself am a screw up, or I know how it feels to be so hard on yourself. One of my kids does this to himself a lot. He's still too young for me to know what type he is. I have no idea what type he is. But when he does do this, I have gotten to the point with him where I can say, I can tell that you're beating yourself up right now, and that's a real bummer. And I just want to remind you that that's a choice. Basically, like you don't have to do, if you want to beat yourself up right now, if you need to beat yourself up right now, like you do you. I'm not feeling down about you at all. And I don't really want to be a part of being mean to you. So you can decide if you want to be mean to yourself, but I'm kind of taking a step back. And that combination of like bringing his awareness to the fact that like this is what you're doing, and also there are other ways to look at this situation if you choose, and then also holding a boundary with him about like I'm not going to actually jump in the pool with you and have like a beat you up festival. That combination really works well for him. So I don't know if he's a one, but that in those moments when he's beating himself up, I do connect with him as a one. And so that's a really great example of how we can use the Enneagram literally as an attunement tool. And if you've listened to this podcast for any time at all, I'm sure you've heard me many, many times say authoritative parenting comes with these two components: attunement with the child and boundaries, or attunement with the child and discipline. And attuning with our kids is hard to do. We have our own unfinished business that makes it so that we're like looking at our children through a veil of our own issues. That's just true for all of us and will never not be true. The more we do our work, the clearer that veil becomes. But it's nice to have a tool where you can say, you know what, even if I have this veil and it's practically opaque right now, I still can recognize the traits of the different, points on the Enneagram, and I can respond to that information, just knowing my child is presenting as this right now. My child is in this point of the Enneagram right now, and I know what to do about that. Even if I don't get them, even if I don't, want to, even if I'm like sort of dysregulated about my own stuff, I still can kind of like use this tool to snap me out of my own navel gazing a little bit and actually take a really good look at my kiddo and know what to do. Because that's the other thing, right? Like maybe you see, like, for example, maybe your kiddo acts like this four, that like moody, attached to their sob story kind of kid. You might recognize that about them already. You might, when I was describing that, be like, oh my gosh, that's my kiddo. But then do you know what to do about it? And that's the other place where the Enneagram is so helpful, because now I know, oh, okay, if this kiddo is in there for me trying to cheer them up or prove their sob story wrong or offer a counterpoint to this like doom and gloom perspective that they have right now, is only going to drive a wedge between us. What I actually need to do is validate their emotions, and they need to get that message from me over and over again. I hear you. I get it. And that's it. Oh, okay. Now when my kid's in this state, it's a lot less stressful, right? So I'm not going to go through the entire Enneagram in terms of like how to respond to each one of these kiddos. That would make a really, really long episode. And also, I want you to book a consultation with me and talk to me about your kids and feel excited and intrigued about learning more about this stuff. So I'm not going to just give it all away. You know, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free, right? That's what my mom told me when I moved in with my husband. Thanks, Mom. Um, so if this is intriguing to you, if you're starting to see like, oh dang, this could actually be the tool for me, I get it. I'm on fire about the Enneagram, as you already know. And my suggestion for you is to set up that consultation with me. And whether or not you want to be using the Enneagram in your parenting, if you want to get better at this stuff, if you want to get better at attuning to your child, if you want to get better at understanding yourself, if you want to get better at being open and non attached and fluid about who your child is and who your child will become, all of these things are what parent coaching offers. The Enneagram is one tool that we can use to get there. And if it's not your tool, that's fine. I've been coaching for years and years and years. And I'd say been using the Enneagram in my coaching for years, maybe behind the scenes, but really tons of clients who use different avenues to get where they're going than the Enneagram. And that's fine too. So if it's intriguing to you, if you're starting to see how this could kind of help you, if you are ready to learn more about coaching, set up that consultation. The link is always in the show notes. And I will talk to you again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.